Are you seeking fulfillment for your life? Do you want freedom from fear? That's why we're here. Welcome to Jesus 101, introducing you to the real Jesus. And now, here's your host, Elizabeth Talbot.
Welcome to Jesus 101. Today we are studying how is it that God keeps His covenant and what to do when there are times when it looks like the promises of God are not coming true in our own lives. Well, I'm going to start today by sharing with you something about my own personal life. I don't regularly do that. I never show photos of myself, but today I want to start showing you 3 photos. The first one is when I'm getting ready to see my husband when we are getting married. You know, I have my wedding gown on, and you can see in my face I'm sparkling, and I have a rose in my hand, and I'm just so excited that I'm going to see him there, in that very place where we are about to become husband and wife. Then after this, the second photo I'm going to show you is the one that has to do with my husband and I together. We are already married now, and this is our wedding photo. But the photographer caught something very interesting that I didn't know about until after the wedding. And it's the third photo that I want to show you. Outside, in silence, my husband was holding a piece of paper. And there in the photo you can see it. That's his hand. And the piece of paper has all the things he has written in his covenant with me. So he put together a beautiful covenant, and he said, I want to make a covenant with you that is based on the covenant of the cross. And I will love you the way that Christ loves his church. And he went on in his beautiful covenant. And I thought it was so special that the photographer was able to catch that moment in which he was writing his covenant to me. Well, I'm glad to say that after many years, his covenant still holds, and I'm thankful for that. Do you know that the word that puts the whole Bible together is the word that we have come to know as covenant? When God decided to tell us that no matter what had happened to the human race, He will not leave us here at the mercy of the serpent who tempted us in Genesis. So throughout the Bible, we have a line of covenants, and they're all the same covenant. It's just that they keep being repeated through different people, by different people, and God keeps reminding us that the covenant still stands, that what He promised at the beginning is still going on. So I'm going to just do a real fast history of redemption. It's very important to do what I call a historical map of redemption. Because you see, the whole Bible is not just the history of the world per se, it's the history of redemption. So you get several hundreds of years of the world history in the first 12 chapters of the Bible. The first person that we could say receives the covenant is Adam. Then after Adam, the second big covenant is Noah. And of course, you know him because of the flood. Then we get Abraham. Now, Abraham saw the same pyramids in Egypt that you can go see today. Because even though we're only in Genesis 12 here, the pyramids in Egypt, for example, were about 700 years old when Abraham went to Egypt. Because you see, the Bible is not just the history of the world, it's the history of redemption. So several hundreds of years go through in the first 12 chapters of the Bible. Now, after Abraham comes, of course, Isaac and Jacob becomes Israel, and that's where the 12 tribes come from. And then, of course, we have Moses, who will deliver the people of Israel. After Moses, they come to the promised land, and King David will be the big covenantal figure there. Of course, after that, the The kingdoms will be divided in the north and south, and the north will be taken by Assyria in 722 BC, and the south will be taken by Babylon in 587 BC. They'll come back, rebuild the temple, then we get the Greek Empire, we get the Roman Empire, and under the Romans, Jesus is born. So this is, let's say, the history of redemption. And every story in the Bible, every single one, whether you're talking about Saul or David or Jonah or Rahab or Ruth, relates to something that has to do with a covenantal historical line in the scriptures. Now, the 6 main covenantal figures in the Bible are Adam, for the whole human race, Noah, when the covenant is repeated for the earth, and the sign will become the rainbow. Then we have Abraham, when the people of God are starting. See, now we start the line. So here we have the family of God starting with Abraham, and he's told that his seed, will eventually bless all nations. The 4th one is going to be Moses. By now, we already have the people or the nation of Israel, because it's growing. This whole plan of salvation and the nation through whom the Messiah would come is growing. And when we get to David, of course, we already have the kingdom of God. So we have 6 main people in the covenant, with many other minor figures in between. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, and Jesus are the 6 great figures of covenantal theology. Now, let me say that the covenant will be repeated in different terms, but continue to repeat it. Abraham is the one that we're going to study today. These people are called typological of Jesus. Typology means that they are symbols of Jesus. They are the shadow, and Jesus is the substance. They're called types. Jesus is the antitype. So all these people and many other typological figures in between will be teaching us things about the plan of salvation. Abraham is one of the main ones, because through the seed of Abraham, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. So now that you know where we are in the history of redemption, today we are going to concentrate in Abraham. Now, Abraham, and I'm actually going to go to my Bible so that we can go deeply together into this story, because Abraham comes from far away from Israel. He wasn't from Israel territory. As a matter of fact, we're just starting the history of Israel through the family of Abraham. And we are told here in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, that all the families of the earth would be blessed from there on through Abraham. But because, of course, this is going to become the seed of Abraham, and from there will come the people of Israel. Now, one day, God takes Abraham out and Abraham looks at the stars. And God says, chapter 15 of Genesis, "Do not fear, Abraham. I am a shield to you, and your reward shall be very great." And Abraham said, "Oh Lord, God, why will you give me since I'm childless?" You see, in that society, not to have a child was a curse. But on top of that, God keeps talking like Abraham is going to have all these descendants, and he has no child. And so Abraham says, "The heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus, his servant." "Oh," says God, "you will have your own descendants." And so verse 4, "Behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This man will not be your heir. Not your servant, not your slave will be your heir. One who will come forth from your own body will be that heir." And he took him outside and said, "Look towards the heavens and count the stars, if you're able to count them." And he said to him, "So shall your descendants be." Verse 6 is the very first verse in the Bible that speaks about righteousness by faith. When somebody believes something and is accounted to him as righteousness. It's the first verse of its kind. Chapter 15 of Genesis, verse 6. "Then he believed in the Lord, and it was accounted to him as righteousness." Which means that He couldn't see how in the world he was going to have these descendants because he has no child. But the Lord said he would, and he believed him. And because Abraham believed God, he became righteous in the sight of God. So this is the first mention of righteousness by faith in the Bible. Well, then the Lord made a covenant, and he told him what would happen in the next few hundred years with his descendants. Now, from here on comes this incredible story of the fact that we're waiting for a descendant for Abraham. And because Abraham is like us, he became impatient. You know, I don't know about you, but God's timing has never matched my timing. His clock doesn't match my watch, ever. You know, and it didn't in this case. And Abraham and Sarah, how long do you wait with excitement until you start losing your faith that what God said would happen is not happening? So this started happening to them. And so Sarah said, well, maybe I have to give Hagar, my servant, my slave, to Abraham, and then she can conceive, and maybe that's what God meant. I can't tell you how many times in my life, especially when I was younger, I tried to help God fulfill his promises in my life. You know, because you get a little impatient. I think eventually you come to believe in God, even though you're not seeing the things happen when they were supposed to happen per your own watch. And this is what happened to Abraham. Hagar did conceive, but that wasn't the son of the promise. The son of the promise would be Isaac. And you know, we have this beautiful story that unfortunately we don't have time to go through. But eventually, at a very late age, Sarah will conceive. Sarah was barren, but now she was not only barren, but she was very, very old. And eventually, after all these years that they actually waited for a child, eventually they got the child. As a matter of fact, in chapter 17 of Genesis, we're told that Abraham was 99 years old. And that's when Isaac was conceived. So Isaac is born. You know, there's a Christian author that is very, very funny on this. It says that Sarah was the first woman in the history of the world to pay the pediatrician with a Social Security check. I think that's a very, very funny statement because, of course, she's already retired and she's getting a child because God's timing is not our timing. So after all this time that we are waiting, and the promised baby is born. Can you imagine Sarah and Abraham with this baby that they waited for decades? I don't know if you've ever waited for a child, probably not, as long as Abraham and Sarah waited for Isaac. Isaac was going to be the baby of the promise. Can you imagine that the whole family of God, the nation of God, the kingdom of God will come through this little baby? That's the beginning of the covenant. Well, here's the baby now. And the baby's growing. And everybody's very happy. Finally, finally God did what he was supposed to do. And then we get chapter 22, which is one of the strangest chapters in all of Genesis. When the very son of the promise, the one that God named, when he said, through that particular son, the covenant will come true. Now Abraham is asked to do something that we cannot even imagine. He has the covenant of God, that is this baby who will bring the whole family of God to this earth and through whom the Messiah will come. That's the covenant. Here God has said something. He has a covenant. He knows this baby is the one. But God will have a very strange request. Chapter 22 of Genesis. It came about after these things that God tested Abraham. Of course, the reader is brought into a reality that Abraham doesn't know. We are told that this is a test and only a test. But of course, Abraham does not know that. And we usually don't when it happens in our own lives. And said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. And the Lord said, take your son. Well, by now we think, well, maybe this is a different son. And just in case there is a mistake, God says, take your son, your only son, the one you love, Isaac. There couldn't be any mistake that the one that God was asking Abraham to take was the son through whom the whole covenant was supposed to take place. How do you deal with something like this? God says, I'm going to be very specific. You know the one I promised you? The one you love so much? The only son you have with Sarah? That's the one. You're going to take him and do what? Oh, Abraham, this is what you're going to do. Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. 3 things. Take your son. Go and offer. Take, go and offer. Take, go and offer. But we're talking about the covenant. We're going to talk about Isaac. There must be a mistake. And on top of that, he was supposed to offer him as a burnt offering. The burnt offering is the offering that completely consumes the victim. Can you imagine Abraham? He rose early, and he has the covenant of God in one hand. The one that God gave him that said, look at the descendants. The history of salvation comes through this baby. And then on the other hand, he has the knife. The one that says, go and offer your son as a burnt offering. You know, these 2 realities many times are present in our lives. We have the promises of God. We know he wants the best for us as soon as possible. And then we have what seems to be happening in our lives that we don't fully understand, and we have to trust. If we are going to trust what we see or what we've been given by God. And in this case, Abraham is walking with both. He's walking with the covenant and he's walking with the knife. And we are told here that he had to do those 3 things. Take, go, and offer. Verse 3. Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split wood. Can you imagine this father's heart? The one that waited for decades for the baby. And he chopped the wood and he went on. Verse 4. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. The place, the land of Moriah. Wow, I can't even imagine what he's going through. And Abraham said to his young men, verse 5, stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there. As a matter of fact, the Hebrew says, we will go, we will worship, and we will return. So some people don't know if he has made up his mind that God is going to do a miracle up there, or if he's just trying to raise his faith, because he's walking with the 2 realities. The covenant of God, the promises of God, and the knife in the other hand. As a matter of fact, even Isaac, who is now a young man, realizes this paradox. They're walking together. Verse 6, Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac. Many people think that this sentence is symbolically, because of course, applied to Jesus, because of course, Isaac eventually, as you know, the end of the story will be delivered, but Jesus would also take the wood on his back. So when he says here, when he was going to Calvary, when he says here that the wood of the burnt offering was laid on Isaac, his son, many people believe this is symbolic of the sacrifice of Jesus. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the 2 of them walked together. Can you imagine? The baby of the promise taking the wood, and Abraham with the knife, holding in his heart the covenant of God. What a paradox. And I have a feeling that many of you today are exactly in that paradox. The promises of God in one hand and the reality you're facing in the other hand. And even the little Isaac realizes this. Verse 7. Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, Father. He said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb? Where is the lamb of the burnt offering? Where is it? And Abraham said, God will provide for himself a lamb. I don't think Abraham knew the prophecy that he was saying at that moment. At that moment, he had not yet understood, because in a moment, he was about to build the altar, we're told, verse 9. They came to the place, and Abraham built the altar and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. So can you imagine the son of the promise now in the altar? I mean, what happens in the heart of a father when that's his baby and he's about to kill it? But not just the baby, the one through whom all descendants was to come. So Abraham takes the knife, and this is Isaac here. And when he's about to kill Isaac, the word of the Lord comes to him. And he stopped from this. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. Can you imagine? Here I am, Lord. He said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear the Lord, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham raised his eyes, and look, behold, behind him, a ram caught in a thicket. Now, we already have the altar, the sacrifice about to take place, but he finds a ram. Today is going to be a little lamb here. So he finds a ram, and so they swap. So Isaac comes out of the altar. Can you imagine the relief of this father? And instead, the little ram is put on the altar instead of the son. And we are told very specifically in the Hebrew that the three things that God had told Abraham to do with his son at the beginning of the story, now he does with the ram instead. Abraham raised his eyes and saw a ram caught in the thickets by his horns, and Abraham went and took and offered. Remember the three words that we had at the very beginning? Take your son and go and offer. Now he took the ram and went and offered. And this is the first substitutionary statement that we have in the Bible. He offered up for a burnt offering in the place of. In the place of. See, here was Isaac supposed to be here. But now for the first time in the covenantal history, the symbol starts applying that instead of the son, the little animal will die. And so he kills the animal, and now the son of the promise is still alive. Now this is very important because we're told later on in Hebrews chapter 11 that Abraham knew that this son was the son of the covenant, and that he came to believe that even if God had to raise him from the dead, he would have to do that. Because at some point, Abraham came to believe in the promise of God more than in the reality he was facing. See, many of us walk with both realities, the things that God has promised, not just our salvation. This is one of the big ones for a lot of people, because they'd say, well, I don't know if I'm going to be saved. But God said that if you have the Son, you have life. So this is the covenant he's made for you. But but look at me. Look at what has happened. And so you walk with death in the other hand. But not just for salvation. Life in general has two sides. The ones you believe in and the one you see. So here Abraham is for the first time understanding the substitution of this little animal for his son. Verse 14, and Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. Well, the story is very wonderful, and we don't have time to go through the whole Bible, how we actually follow this story. But perhaps the one I do want to tell you is that this land of Moriah eventually was bought by David. Again, when the death had to be stopped, when he took a census, and this was the area that was owned by the Jebusite. He had to buy that, and when he bought that and did a sacrifice in the same place, death actually stopped for his people. Well, Actually, all of this was teaching us something really big, and I want to tell you what it was. 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1. We are told that the temple of Jerusalem was built in this mount that eventually became known as the Mount Zion. It was in the land of Moriah. And I read in 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1, Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had also appeared to his father David, at the place that David had prepared. So there's many things that happen in this place, and the first one is the sacrifice of Isaac. Then after that is the sacrifice that David gives. Eventually, the Temple of Solomon is built on land Moriah. See, Jesus said that Abraham saw his day. Jesus said that Abraham understood the gospel. He says that in John chapter 8, verse 56. Jesus says, Abraham saw my day. He saw my day and he rejoiced. And I believe that he saw his day up on that mountain that day when the substitution happened and his little baby didn't have to die. His little son didn't have to die because a little animal died in its place. Now God has made a covenant with you, and covenants are meant to be kept. God made the covenant with his children that he's coming back. Not only that he is the Passover lamb, not only that he is the little animal that all the sacrificial system in the Old Testament was pointing to, but also that he's coming back to take us home. And, you know, just like the photos that I showed you of my wedding, we are told that very soon we will be back with the one who made a covenant with us. The phrase for the covenant in the Bible is a phrase that you have seen many times. It's the one that says, I will be their God and they will be my people. I will be their God and they will be my people. And at the end of times, we are told, finally, the tabernacle of God is among men, Revelation 21:3. And he will dwell with them and they shall be his people. See, all the time, God has given us a covenant, and he didn't allow us to forget this covenant throughout all of the scriptures, because the scriptures, all of them, they're actually talking about this covenant. And the Passover lamb was sacrificed. And actually, this is when the Lamb of God, who had no sin, died instead of us. I have come to give my life a ransom for many, said Jesus. And on the cross, the covenant was sealed forever. He's coming back. Rejoice in that reality.